Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're sifting through the wreckage of several simultaneous crises, all happening in two wildly divergent environments.
Yeah, they couldn't be more different. We have our source material, which is this incredibly detailed, almost forensic chronicle, and it's tracking events as they unfold across, on the one hand, the Ennett House halfway facility.
Which is all structured chaos. Yeah.
Exactly. And on the other, you have the sterile, almost fever dream landscape of a major Boston trauma center, St. Elizabeth's.
It's a real nexus point. We're seeing high-level, clandestine political drama just smash head-on with these profoundly intimate, deeply buried personal traumas.
Absolutely. We're looking at the fallout from a violent brawl. You've got residents, you've got alleged Canadian operatives. It's a mess. And in the middle of all that, there's this urgent secret hunt for a missing lethal film cartridge.
And an interrogation that's tied directly to the infamous auteur who created it. It's just this incredible tangle of self-destructive, often bizarre struggles. These characters, they're not just desperate for sobriety.
No, not at all. They're fighting for basic sanity.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this. I mean, the sheer volume of violence and this clandestine searching, it just sounds like overwhelming confusion. So where do we even begin to draw a line between a halfway house brawl and a secret intelligence interrogation?
Well, that's the thing.
Our mission today has to be extracting the core insights from this density. What are the motivations, the unspoken tensions? What are the psychic pressures driving these people as they try to navigate a world that's perpetually, teetering between self-destruction and revelation?
And the connection, as the sources reveal, is that trauma, addiction, and denial, they're universal solvents. They don't care about class or wealth or institutional walls.
They just dissolve everything.
Everything, and they manifest physically. I mean, they literally deform the body and the mind, forcing these characters to confront their past wreckage in real time.
And it doesn't matter if that confrontation happens through, say, a feverish hallucination or some mandated bizarre emotional regression group.
Right. The source material shows us, again and again, the consequences are consistently and demonstrably deadly.
So we begin part I at Ennett House. It's just after 8:30 in the morning. And this is not some peaceful contemplative recovery scene. It's a moment of just residual institutional anxiety.
Mm-hmm. And we're with Janet F. She is pulling her 5th straight night shift of what they call dream duty.
And she is fighting this deep, deep boredom and fatigue by dipping her finger into scalding hot coffee. It's this small, immediate pain, just to distract from the lingering psychological pain.
And this particular morning is significant because of the rules. The front door unlocks at 0800, and it's supposed to be fully open to anyone by 0801. Anyone except law enforcement.
So a knock at 8:30 in the morning.
It instantly signifies a newcomer or stranger. And Janet's immediate, almost visceral reaction is fear. She's anticipating the suit-and-tie police.
Which is a completely rational fear.
Totally. Especially given the massive, chaotic Lenz and Gately and Canadian fuck-up that just went down. The house manager is in a really delicate legal position.
That recent violence has just ratcheted up the institutional tension to a breaking point. And Jeanette, who doesn't even have formal staff status, she automatically reaches for the clipboard.
The one with the residents' legal issues?
Yeah, the one listing residents with unresolved legal issues.
Yeah.
And it's this pathetic but vital emblem of authority for her. She's ready to shuttle anyone on that list upstairs, get them out of sight. It's a low-grade, constant state of self-preservation.
But the person knocking is, well, it's definitely not law enforcement. Jeanette opens the door, and she chooses not to point out the rule that you don't have to knock, and in walks this individual who, to her eye, just radiates an entire planet of privilege.
And this kid's demeanor immediately clashes with Jeanette's own planet. Hers is rooted in South Chelsea and the Right Honorable Edmund F. Heaney Facility for Demonstrably Incorrigible Girls.
The contrast is stark.
The sources spend such wonderful forensic detail in describing this visitor, Hal. He has this cool aluminum sheen, maybe a strange tan or a weird windburn. His jeans are ironed, sharp crease.
And the whitest Nike high tops.
Yes. And an expensive jacket with AGE stitching up the sleeves. He is just an image of highly maintained upkeep. But, and this is the critical detail that instantly undermines the whole facade.
The hair.
The hair. His dark hair, it's slicked back, still wet from a shower, and it has half frozen in the cold outside. It makes his face look small and vulnerable, and his ears just look inflamed.
That half-frozen hair is the perfect visual metaphor for his internal state, isn't it?
It really is. Jeanette puts on what's called a blandly hostile expression. It's her defense mechanism, right?
Yeah.
To preemptively counter his implied judgment of her missing front teeth, her nose pin.
But what she observes so quickly is that the boy doesn't have enough, and I love this phrase, emotional juice, to even notice her, let alone judge her appearance. His attention is just completely consumed by his own internal crisis.
And his physical presence, it just betrays his recent activity. His way of talking has this burbly, over-salivated quality.
Which Jonette recognizes all too wicked well.
She instantly identifies it as the sign of someone who had just lately put down the bite on door bong, the sophisticated exterior, the ATE jacket, that frozen sheen. It's all just hiding a very basic, very recent internal chemical breakdown.
The mask is literally melting because of the cold outside and the raw compulsion inside.
Which brings us right to the language of denial. And this is universal, doesn't matter how wealthy you are. The kid is there to find an anonymous meeting schedule, but his request is just hopelessly convoluted.
So roundabout.
He describes his interest as idle, largely speculative, and basically is just something to do. He can't just come out and ask for the schedule.
And Jonette, she instantly diagnoses this. This is the exact same roundabout denial shit as persons without teeth.
It's the sheer ineptitude masked by this high-level education that is so telling. I mean, this is an individual who knows how to use the precise, high-class verbal marker, say whom, yet he lacks the basic functional awareness to just look up a meeting schedule in the yellow pages.
Or online, yeah.
It just confirms to Jonette that his high-maintenance needs are purely emotional and existential, and they're just cloaked in this language of academic precision.
And Jonette, even though she is profoundly fatigued, she locks on to those two immediate contradictions. You have the image of his frozen hair slowly settling in the heat of the front office.
And then his struggle to just pronounce the word whom without, this clear, upscale, odor-free saliva running over his lower lip.
The privilege is proving utterly insufficient to mask the raw compulsion. And the ineptitude that comes from being emotionally crippled just shines right through.
So the narrative confirms this upscale kid, how he gets the meeting schedule and he's off on his quest. But his motivation, as we learn, it's highly specific, and it's very intellectualized.
Right. It's not a slobbering inability to abstain. He's been clean since what's described as a 30-day urological condemnation of last week.
His drive is purely internal. It's the horrific way his head's felt. He describes a constant revving chainsaw sound, and it leaves him in this state of 247 feeling wretched and bereft.
And he's trying to fight this existential emotional battle with his formidable intellectual resources. During this dull tow truck drive out to Natick, Hal uses his unique talent for a mental Xerox of anything he's ever read.
He calls up the discursive OED entry on the developmental history of AA. He's practicing his pseudonym, my name's Mike, into the rearview mirror. He is trying to approach a deeply spiritual and emotional crisis with only factual, historical, and lexical armor.
He's rushing, right? He skips dinner, he races out in a tow truck, which is this symbol of rescue and utility that's the complete antithesis of the leisurely inner pace of recovery.
All to check out this 17:30 out Tuesday meeting, listed only as QRS 32A out in Natick.
In the Quabbin Recovery Systems complex, it immediately feels menacing. I feel like it's threatening to swallow him whole. It's an undeformed cube of rough panel brick looking like a building block from some Child Titan's toy chest.
And the smoky brown windows give it a bloody, polluted aspect when they're lit up from inside. The quiet inside is glittery and menacing, and it's saturated with this vague medical smell and the bland, sour smell of institutional food.
He feels deeply furtive and burglarish.
So he finally finds room 32A, and he's fully expecting Narcotics Anonymous, based on the name of the place. And what he finds is not only not NA, it's utterly surreal.
It's revealed to be a men's issues, men's movement type meeting, and the scene is just set with almost crushing detail. You have 9 or 10 bearded, middle-class men, the kind of guys who wear chinos and sweaters, sitting cross-legged in these orange plastic chairs.
And every single one of them is clutching identical teddy bears.
These plump, brown, splay-limbed bears, they have little red corduroy tongues, and they look oddly throttled. And the air is stuffy, smelling of socked male middle-aged bodies not wearing footwear.
Okay, we have to stop right there. The image of professional educated men in chinos clutching identical teddy bears in a stuffy institution.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the absolute height of the absurdity of denial. What does the source say about the psychological tension this forces? The juxtaposition of cleanliness and privilege with this mandated infantile humiliation.
That juxtaposition is the entire point of the scene. The leader, this guy Harv, is morbidly round. He resembles a Buddha's California surfer dude.
Right.
He's holding his own bear, and he's speaking in this bland, didactic voice, instructing them to let our inner infant non-judgmentally listen. And the background music just adds to the sheer existential cringe,
Low, treacly ambient shopping mall music.
which Hal recognizes as sounding exactly like Philip Glass on Quaaludes.
So Hal is trying to maintain his intellectual objectivity here. He's trying to frame inner infant as just some, I don't know, NA sobriquet for the limbic component of the CNS, but his intellectual armor just shatters when he identifies the sobbing man in the circle.
Kevin Bacon.
Marlon Bain's older brother.
Yeah.
A man with an MBA who ran simulated reality arcades and had no history of drug abuse.
And Kevin Bain's crisis has absolutely nothing to do with substances. He's weeping over his inner infant's abandonment and deep deprivation issues, and these stem from his parents dying in this horrific and almost comically bizarre fashion.
Smushed by a dysfunctionally falling radio traffic helicopter.
I mean, the sheer randomness and grotesque nature of that death just underscores the fact that trauma doesn't need to be substance-related to be crippling.
And the ensuing power dynamic becomes this horrifying spectacle of forced emotional regression. Harv, speaking calmly over the gooey music, demands that Kevin actively meet his infant's need for love and holding rather than just waiting passively for it.
He even uses his own bear, waggling its little arms to pretend it's asking Kevin's bear who he wants to be held by. It's regression that's presented as empowering, but it's just pure theatrical humiliation.
It culminates in this unbearable climax. After Kevin points his bear at a mild-faced, yogurt-eating man named Jim, Harv forces the issue. Let your infant do the walking, Kev.
And Kevin, he's struggling with this intense, mortified embarrassment. His neck is red and shiny with sweat. He has to crawl on all fours toward the motionless Jim, and he's hampered because one arm has to hold the teddy bear.
Hal's reaction is intensely physical. Waves of nausea, a frantic mental scroll for faraway places he'd rather be. He came there seeking factual, structured relief from an inner chainsaw sound, and instead he found a meeting that validated this highly theatrical, regression-based emotional exhibitionism.
The immediate consequence for Hal is just a profound deepening of his dread. He realizes his emotional predicament isn't something he can just Xerox his way out of.
No.
It's one that threatens to swallow him whole in pure, public, infantile humiliation. He leaves QRS even more wretched than when he arrived.
And that feeling of forced public regression is our thematic bridge, right? We see Hal literally reduced to seeking help in a place where men crawl like infants. And now we switch gears to an interrogation that reveals how a different kind of trauma, the auteur's trauma, was built entirely on forcing regression onto someone else, Lucille Duquette, a trauma that ultimately turned lethal. So we're moving from the bizarre denial of Natick to the high-stakes paranoia of the intelligence community. We encounter MIT ABD PhD Molly Notkin. She's being grilled by USO/US operatives, led by Artine Jr., in the darkened living room of her co-op.
The setting is just classic clandestine noir. But the source emphasizes that what prompted her to spill her guts, roll over, eat cheese, sing like a canary, wasn't psychological pressure.
No, it was physical.
It was the physical reality of a portable high-watt lamp adjusted to shine directly on her fully exposed post-Marxist face. The physical imposition of that light is an immediate, inescapable constraint that just bypasses all her intellectual defenses.
And Notkin's testimony focuses on the alleged substance of the legendary missing film cartridge, Infinite Jest, VZIA, created by the late auteur Cheo Incandenza. She relays the film's core content. Madame Psychosis naked, corporeally gorgeous, hugely pregnant, but her hideously deformed face is either veiled or blanked out by a strange lens, and she's delivering a monologue on death.
And the death cosmology that MP relays is profoundly unsettling. It's delivered in very simple, childlike language. And the thesis is that death is always female and that the female is always maternal. The woman who kills you in this view is always your next life's mother.
And this is the core psychological fuel for the film's lethal nature, according to the monologue. Mothers are obsessively, consumingly, drivenly, and yet somehow narcissistically loving.
Because they are trying frantically to make amends for a murder neither of you quite remember. The film proposes that the fundamental drive of maternity is actually guilt and existential compensation.
And the auteur didn't just write this. The camera work itself reinforces the theory. It turns the audience into the infant, into the victim. The camera, described as a Rube Goldberg-esque digital adaptation of a Bolex H32, is subjective.
It's lying on the floor or a cot.
Right. And MP is inclined over it, talking down to it. This introduces what's called a synesthetic double entendre that positions the audience, the camera, as the infant/victim receiving the monologue.
Notkin connects the film's theme to real-life, immediate tragedy. MP's mother killed herself in a truly ghastly way with an ordinary kitchen garbage disposal on Thanksgiving in the year of the Tux medicated pad.
We do need to pause on that specific dating for a second.
Right. YTMP is the year of the Tux medicated pad, and it's worth noting the source specifically uses this branded timestamp to mark the tragedy. It suggests that even the most personal, horrific moments, like a suicide, are categorized within this artificially constructed, commercialized timeline.
Which adds a bizarre layer of abstraction to profound loss. And JOI, the auteur, he killed himself just 4 months later, also with a kitchen appliance. This prompts Notkin to note the potential for a grotesque, domestic Lincoln Kennedy-type connection between the two suicides, both using commonplace items for violent self-termination.
Notkin, however, she completely dismisses the claim that the cartridge is lethally entertaining. She believes it was merely the thinly veiled cries of a man at the very terminus of his existential tether.
She thinks he probably destroyed it.
Yeah, that the auteur, who had reportedly destroyed previous failed attempts, likely destroyed this master print as well. He saw it as pathetic instead of revolutionary. This is her factual basis for arguing that the US is on a costly, time-wasting fool's errand for an item that doesn't even exist.
And we get a window into the complicated transactional relationship between MP and JOI. MP had demanded JOI stop injecting distilled spirits as a personal condition for her appearing nude in his final film.
And he kept his side of the bargain for 3.5 months, right up until his suicide. But MP's subsequent secret substance abuse was purely guilt-driven. She believed that stopping the wild turkey had been all that was keeping the man's tether raveled.
And then you have the auteur's widow engaging in this passive-aggressive act of rage. JOI had never been willing to give up spirits for her, but he did so for Madame Psychosis in her nude appearance.
And Notkin speculates that this spousal rage led the widow to place that special limited edition turkey-shaped gift bottle of wild turkey next to the suicide scene, a deliberate symbolic act of spite that framed his death.
Notkin further casts doubt on the auteur's integrity, suggesting his trauma had way less to do with digital art and much more to do with his widow engaging in sexual enmeshments with just about everything with the Y chromosome, including possibly his own son, Oren.
MP's craven lover.
Exactly. The entire Incandenza family is revealed as this interlocking set of self-destructive relationships.
And now we dive into the truly catastrophic genesis of Madame Psychosis's irreparable facial trauma, which Notkin says was like something pulled directly from one of the auteur's most ghastly and unresolvable proto-incestuous disaster films.
Lucille Duquette, MP, was an only child, extremely close to her father, a low-pH chemist in Kentucky. The father consciously replicated the deep, close relationship he had had with his own mother, focusing on shared movie watching.
But as MP hit puberty, the relationship turned deeply creepy. The father began behaving as if she were getting younger rather than older. He interdicted everything from brasiers to pap smears and addressed the nubile MP in progressively puerile baby talk like Pookie or Pootie.
The father's denial system was under enormous silent pressure. His pure, repressed, impossible love for his daughter could only be compensated for by forcing her back mentally and emotionally to an age of incontinence and pre-mashed meat.
And this entire fragile system finally blew apart when MP brought the auteur's son, Oren the Little Rotter, home for Thanksgiving.
The breaking point happens at the dinner table. November 24th, YTMP. The low-pH daddy began cutting up MP's turkey and then, significantly, mashing it into a puree between the tines of his fork.
An MP who's now a legal adult with a career, she finally asked the unspoken question, why precisely did she still need help to chew?
And the father's response was just a full-scale emotional eruption, a raw confession of his secret, genuflectory, timeless, impossible love. He admitted he could only cope with her nubility and impending independence by forcing her back into childhood dependency.
It was an admission of psychological control based on impossible desire.
But amid the clatter of plates, the deeper trauma emerged. The mother's denial system, which had kept her complicit for years, completely shattered. She shrieked that she and the father hadn't been intimate since MP first menstruated.
And then critically, she admitted that her own father, an itinerant camp-meeting preacher, had molested her and her sister, leading her to realize she had married the exact same kind of monster.
The catastrophe is swift. The mother, reeling from decades of denial, runs to the cellar, which is the location of the father's acid lab, intent on disfiguring herself with acid. The father, Oren, and MP follow her down into this toxic, confined space.
And the mother hurls a flask of corrosive, low-pH acid marked with an enormous, half-eaten away skull at the father.
And this is where the trauma becomes permanent and physical. The father ducks. Oren, the tennis champion, he instinctively ducks with superb upper body reflexes.
But MP is dazed and bradykinetic from the sudden venting of so many high-pressure repressive family systems.
We should probably clarify bradykinetic here.
Yeah, it means she was moving extremely slowly, in a state of psychological shock, unable to react quickly, and that slow, dazed reaction meant she took the direct facial hit, resulting in the hideous deformity that necessitates her UHID membership. The trauma made her unidentifiable.
And the immediate final consequences are horrifyingly specific. The mother, having been liberated from custody due to everyone's failure to press charges, commits suicide in the kitchen.
And not with a gun, by putting her extremities down the kitchen garbage disposal. First one arm.
Then, kind of miraculously, if you think about it, the other arm.
And Oren, the little rotter, he uses the physical deformity as his immediate excuse to abandon MP, accusing her, in a final act of cruelty, of sleeping with his father. The auteur's film wasn't lethal because of its plot. It was lethal because the psychological engine that powered its creation.
The familial incest, the psychological regression, the corrosive violence.
It was so raw, so specific, and so utterly self-destructive that it transmitted actual psychic pain.
All right, so we shift now from the cold, clinical paranoia of that interrogation room to the fevered reality of St. Elizabeth's trauma wing, where Don Gately is fighting for his life, both physically against infection and spiritually against his own past.
He's massive, shot in the shoulder, and suffering from a massive infection that requires toxemia monitoring. His condition is dire. His right side feels encased in hot cement, and his throat feels raped, leaving him unable to move or vocalize.
He can only make sounds that resemble a run-over kitten or moos.
And the sources immediately highlight Gately's core struggle, which is one of profound spiritual integrity. He is adhering strictly to his resolution of no Schedule CV plus medic.
He is refusing Demerol, codeine, and Percocet for the kind of pain that feels like scream and yank your charred hand off the stove type pain. He's choosing absolute, terrifying physical agony over compromising his hard-won sobriety.
And his inability to speak is like speechlessness in bad dreams, airless and hellish, horrid. This forced muteness creates this awful isolation. He can't ask for basic needs, changing the soaked sheets, going to the bathroom. He just resigns himself to the feeling of being passively catheterized.
He's helpless, trapped inside his enormous pained body.
Pat Montesian, the Enid House staffer, she visits and offers some critical guidance, trying to help him navigate the spiritual minefield. She reassures him that his violence during the fracas was legitimate se offendendo.
And we should probably define that legal term for clarity. Se offendendo is self-defense. So the key distinction here is whether Gately acted in justified self-defense, a righteous act to protect himself and others, or whether this was just a chaotic shooting that amounted to a huge fucking beef.
Exactly. And Pat insists that taking narcotics for medical pain would not be a relapse unless his heart of hearts that knew his motives thought it would be. This is the ultimate test of Gately's personal spiritual integrity.
Forcing him to decide, in the midst of agonizing pain, if the craving or the medical necessity is driving the request.
And while Gately is wrestling with this, dealing with the white convex ceiling that bulges and recedes like a monstrous vacuole inhaling and exhaling, he gets a strange visitor, Tiny Ewell.
Ewell is newly melted and clean-shaven, and he takes advantage of Gately's mute state to deliver this long, agonizing, one-sided confession.
And Ewell's confession drills down to his third-grade past, leading the Money Stealers Club bunco operation among blue-collar Irish lads from East Watertown.
And it was there that Ewell realized his gift for bullshit, the verbal manipulation of human hearts, and how it aroused something dark in my personality. This realization led to profound wickedness and the embezzlement of the funds to buy Fez, Milky Ways, and a Creeple People oven.
This moment, the creation of the Money Stealers Club, it wasn't just a childhood prank. Ewell's entire adult life, his career in tax law, his descent into heavy drinking, his miserable marriage, was all informed by this one interval. He became a turd counter of his life, obsessively trying to remake himself as good to compensate for that core dark realization.
And the sources confirm that Gately's reluctant act of se offendendo during the fracas is what triggered Ewell's repressed memory. Ewell feels this crushing shame over this buried interval, and he lodges a complaint against the AA promise that more will be revealed.
He argues that some things are genuinely better left submerged. He views Gately, mute and inert, as a huge empty confessional booth, a person incapable of judgment or response.
Next, Calvin Thrust, a senior counselor at Ennett House, arrives. He smells of smoke and old scrambled eggs, and he straddles a chair backwards like a slow-teased stripper to deliver the grim after-action report.
And he emphasizes the mess. Gately's blood is everywhere, Pat's vinyl couch, the street, and horrifyingly, the beloved upholstery of Thrust's beloved Corvette.
Thrust provides critical legal context. The House manager performed this brilliant tactical maneuver, blocking the BPZ finest in EMPHH security by assertively stating that Ennett House was a court-mandated protected area.
Which kept the police at bay, at least for a while.
But the violence was extensive and lethal. Thrust relays the core, terrifying detail. Clennett H. and Yolanda W. stomped a Canadian nuck to death, literally driving a spike heel through the right eye.
They are now restricted to their room near the chilling map of the nuck they allegedly stomped.
So the legal crisis hinges entirely on the missing alleged item the .44 Gately was shot with. Thrust stresses that this gun is the single biggest problem. It represents the difference between Gately achieving a scenario of iron-shod self-defense and...
It's just maybe a huge fucking beef in which Gately got mysteriously plugged. Without the gun, his claim of self-defense is tenuous, and the legal threat is immediate.
And Gately is just internally screaming three questions. Was anyone killed? Has the notorious hat-wearing ADA caught wind of his involvement? And is the nerve network connecting his voice box running through his damaged right shoulder, dooming him to make piratical R80 sounds with a prosthetic hook?
His physical paralysis perfectly mirrors his legal paralysis. He is mute and powerless over Thrust.
Gately's isolation finally breaks in his fever dream, where he's visited by a ghostish figure. A very tall, sunken-chested man in black framed glasses, who Gately eventually realizes is Geo Incandenza, the auteur, appearing as a wraith.
And the wraith speaks only in Gately's brain voice, which means any dialogue the wraith initiates sounds like Gately's own thoughts. This ambiguity adds intensely to the crisis. Gately's questioning if the auteur is real or just an articulation of his high fever.
The wraith explains they exist in a different Heisenbergian dimension of rate change, where animate men's actions move as slowly as a clock's hour hand. It takes incredible patience and fortitude for a wraith to stand still long enough to interface.
And JOI claims he's been sitting in that chair for the wraith equivalent of 3 weeks.
The wraith focuses on the concept of figurants, the silent background actors in shows like Cheers, whose mouths move but nothing is heard. JOI confesses that he personally spent the vast bulk of his own former animate life as pretty much a figurant, furniture at the periphery.
He felt unheard and unseen despite all his fame.
And this is where it gets really interesting, connecting the high art to the personal failure. The auteur's greatest failure, he confesses, was that his own youngest son was retreating into silence, becoming a figurative figurant himself.
JOI's final sober purpose, the drive that kept him clean for 89 days before his suicide, was to create a figurantless entertainment.
This was the lethal cartridge, a magically entertaining toy. In simpler terms, JOI realized his art had become so complex and self-contained that it mirrored his son's own withdrawal into silence and anhedonia.
His final project wasn't meant to be high art. It was a literal SOS, designed to compel his son to engage with the world again, to reverse his fall into the womb of solipsism, anhedonia, death in life. It was a desperate attempt to communicate and say, I am so very, very sorry, to his son.
The immense irony, though, is that the auteur, a man obsessed with anti-confluential post-Marxist art that critics deemed dull and self-conscious, sought ultimately to create the most basic emotional experience. A laugh, a cry, a return from withdrawal.
But Gately, who is in agonizing pain and already struggling with the auteur's self-pity, he experiences the wraith's consciousness as a terrifying invasion.
Yeah, while JOI is performing pirouettes on the ceiling, a visual image. Gately can barely process highbrow terminology comes crashing through Gately's head with roaring and unwilled force.
Pirouette, ekaikatura, latrodectus mactans. Agora. This is a painful lexical rape, a profound violation of Gately's own inner world by a sophisticated, abstract intelligence he doesn't understand. His lack of vocabulary is weaponized against him by the ghost of a highbrow artist.
As the fever dream wears on, Gately's mind shifts. It bypasses the abstract misery of the wraith to drill down into his own core childhood shame, his relationship with his mother's live-in boyfriend, the controlled, muscular former MP.
And this MP was a master of psychological control and physical violence. Gately involuntarily notes the terrifying similarity between his mother's pain screams during the beatings and her sex sounds through the bedroom wall.
It's a horrific conflation of pleasure and agony. The most hazardous time for his mother was always between 8 and 10 Heinekens.
The MP was a true turd counter, meticulously recording his weights, his repetitions, and his Heineken consumption in separate little notebooks. He equated this precise record-keeping with control.
Gately knew this entire structure was bullshit and maybe crazy, but it was the reality he had to live within.
And this obsession with control and quantification manifested in this act of cold, precise cruelty involving houseflies. The MP would catch flies on the kitchen table and whack them just hard enough to disable them, then precisely remove either a wing or a leg and meticulously deposit the piece in the kitchen wastebasket.
And the rationale was explained in chilling detail. This is where the trauma hits its apex. A well-maimed fly, the MP said, produced tiny little fly screams of pain and fear that other flies could hear, and it would deter them.
It was psychological warfare against nature, a controlled terror deployed against the helpless.
And Gately, as a child, would hunch down, his big red ear down just as close to the fly as possible, listening intently for the screams.
The deepest, most agonizing pain Gately feels now, in his adult, massive, paralyzed body, is his inability to recall ever putting the maimed flies out of their misery. He had refused to intervene during the beatings, deciding it was not his business, and he failed to intervene with the flies.
His shame stems directly from this childhood passivity and his failure to act as a protector, a failure that now echoes in the agonizing moos of his own helpless body.
The final, terrifying confrontation with external reality comes when 3 visiting white flaggers recovering alcoholics stop by to offer support.
Gately, making these pathetic grunting sounds, tries to signal his fear about a figure outside his door.
And the flaggers confirm his dread. They describe the figure in detail, allowing Gately to identify him instantly. Tall, well-dressed, grumpy, cocky-looking, piggy-eyed, wearing a hat, surrounded by sports pages and the takeout foods of many cultures.
This isn't just any prosecutor. This is the remorseless Revere ADA. The one Gately knows is famous for sticking to charges like glue, famous for his willingness to wait forever for a confession.
He is trapped. The ADA who holds Gately's legal fate is patiently waiting, prepared for a long stay. And Gately has just learned he is potentially facing homicide charges for the knuck stomped by Clonette and Yolanda.
A charge hinging entirely on whether that missing gun is found.
And in this moment of acute physical pain and existential terror, the flaggers offer their own bitter form of fellowship. They're joking about Al-Anon being the Church of Perpetual Revenge, or CPR.
Mocking the idea of compassion or unmanly expression of pain.
And Gately is forced to perform a dumb show of polite laughter. Even though the tiny thoracic movements make him want to bite the side of his hand in pain, he is literally forced to pretend his physical and existential crisis is a joke, cementing his current terrifying silence. Hashtag outro.
So, what does this all mean? The deep dive into these sources, it reveals that the denial of self and the denial of pain are just profoundly costly. It doesn't matter what package they come in.
Right. You have Hal and Kevin Bain, highly privileged, ostensibly drug-free, and they're reduced to crawling on the floor, clutching teddy bears because they cannot access their true emotional needs without this grotesque performance and regression.
And this denial is simply this psychic counterpoint to Gately's literal physical crisis. Gately cannot speak because of his physical injury, but his muteness. It mirrors the auteur's son's silence and the eternal silence of the figurants.
The inability to articulate truth, whether it's through trauma, through forced infantilism, or through institutionalized pretense, that is the most pervasive symptom of the crises we've chronicled.
Gately, in his effort to stay physically sober, is forced into a deep, agonizing psychological dive. His consciousness, blocked from chemical relief, becomes permeable.
And his internal dialogue partners are the active, toxic ghosts of his past. The wraith the auteur, who wanted to be a protective father figure but failed to protect his son.
And the relentless memory of the maimed flies, the cruel inertia and inaction of his childhood self. He's trying to cleanse his physical wound while the deep infection of his past guilt is just raging actively in his mind.
The core insight is that for those trapped by addiction and trauma, reality itself becomes highly subjective and permeable. Gately's trauma isn't a memory anymore. It is an active presence on his heart monitor and in his brain voice. His choice to remain sober has simply exchanged chemical pain management for existential psychological agony, forcing him to confront the dark core of his moral failings in real time.
And finally, a provocative thought to leave you with. The single immediate homicide at Enid House, the stomping of the Canadian Nuck, was executed with a spike heel, a distinct weapon of feminine power and rage, left precisely protruding from the victim's eye. So, given the detailed chronicle of violent familial incest, abandonment, and the acid trauma suffered by Lucille Duquette, Madame Psychosis, does the use of the heel suggest that the most immediate, tangible consequence of the auteur's lethal entertainment wasn't external chaos, but rather a violent, self-defensive eruption of long-repressed feminine trauma manifesting within the confines of the halfway house? The silent trauma always finds a way to speak, and often it chooses the loudest, most violent voice. Something to think about as you consider where the final piece of the puzzle, that missing gun, might be hiding.